I watched the Odyssey and I watched it twice. Hi, this is episode 1 of FilmYap. Saying I watched the Odyssey twice, you might think, oh, he loved the Odyssey. I wouldn't say I even liked the Odyssey. I had fun, I enjoyed the Odyssey, I thought I wasn't bored, but not being bored with a film and liking a film, I think, are two different things. A lot of really bad films can be not boring to me. I actually don't hate bad films. I think bad films are necessary, and any work of art is trying to do something can end up either bad or good. The only kind of film that I don't really like is a pretentious film, is a film that's trying to be more than it is. I have to say that out of the filmography of Nolan, probably the Odyssey is not the most pretentious. Why I watched it twice is because I think first watch of any film is no good for analyses. If you really want to give a film a chance, you have to watch it multiple times. That's why I watched the Odyssey. I wanted to see if actually there was a level of detail that I was missing, especially because it's such a long film, right? I feel definitely towards the end of the film, Nolan starts to give you this kind of spiel of like the monologue where Matt Damon talks to his wife and she's like, "You're the sea people," and then there's this montage of different symbolic things with Matt Damon's voiceover, and it's about the Mycenaean collapse, basically the Greek civilization, and I think that was quite a bit pretentious, and I watched the Odyssey a second time to see that if there was a level of secondary detail, that there are things that can be interpreted different ways that I didn't catch in the first viewing, because actually that is the best sort of art. The most satisfying films to me are the films that you can return to and you can discover new things. I'm not talking about like a Marvel style Easter eggs, although those are really fun, I like those, but I'm talking about a possibility. You start to see possibilities of, whoa, I didn't pick up on that and I didn't think of that. To name a few of these films that I think are great films, great layered, textured, detailed films with a lot of subtext, Birth would be one by Jonathan Glazer. A quick summary of the film. Birth is sort of a psychological drama. Nicole Kidman plays the role of an upper society lady who many years after the death of her husband, she never got remarried. And one day in her engagement party to finally a new man that she sees herself, there's this kid that sneaks into the engagement party and demands that he talks to her, and he tells her that actually he is her dead husband. Freaky, I know, and sounds ridiculous. Here's why this film is interesting. The more the film goes on, the more you start to think that every interpretation of what, okay, this kid is sick in the head, she is really vulnerable and she misses her husband, or that he is actually her husband, starts to seem more viable. And I'm not saying viable in the terms of like what's real in the film, right? Because the most interesting works of art are where things are as close to uncertainty without feeling arbitrary, where anything can happen. To me, any great film, any great work of art is something that is born out of the fact that we don't know. There's just so much we don't know about life, and life is so mysterious, enigmatic, and every work of art is basically kind of an attempt to engage with that, right? And for me, the Odyssey didn't have that sort of detail. Another great example of that is a film that I watched recently because I live in Paris, and there's been this retrospective in a few cinemas in Paris where they show the films of Jacques Tati. Jacques Tati is a great French filmmaker. He's often compared to Charlie Chaplin of France, but I think that's a very reductive statement. He's more than that. He's an incredible filmmaker. So is Charlie Chaplin, but I think more so than Chaplin, who is very much an entertainer and a pioneer of act mechanics and stuff like that. Tati is an artist. Films are loaded with societal insight, criticism, just a view on life that is very interesting and is so well built into his filmography. Actually, he is such a great example of what we can call an auteur. We often think of like film auteurs as people who have a very obvious visual style, right? But many auteurs are, to me, actually people who have their own philosophy when it comes to filmmaking and when it comes to art and life, and they have ideas that are present in their work. Now, when I say ideas, this is something I think that is a misconception that often happens, and I used to think like that. I don't think actually that cinema is a great format for ideas as we generally think of them, as just ideas, as statements, or ideas like something like, the free market encourages competition. That's not the sort of idea that you can in cinema. In cinema, ideas are more of like a recreation of life and its complexities, and the complexities of human behavior and society. Those are the things that are interesting to explore in cinema. And in Jacques Tati, his main themes have always been class, society, our connection to each other, modern life, as in life in the city, life in the big city, where people are just always so close to one another but not connected, as opposed to life in the countryside, where people have a much more communal and differently paced life. I recently rewatched Monong, and I love it so much. One of the things that is really nowadays so breathtaking about Monong is just how he directs the film as if it's a moving painting all the time. There's so many, most of the films, just the way, first of all, the way that he makes this film funny is so interesting, because this film is still funny to me. It was like my fourth or fifth time watching this film, and it was still funny. And I genuinely don't remember the last time I watched the film at the cinema. That was a recent film that was actually funny to me. Maybe the last was the New Police Academy, and that's because usually, I don't know, maybe humor doesn't age very well. And humor is, the things that we find funny are so in the moment. They're so like kind of the societal issues that we're interested in, and they're things like race and sex relations, all that sort of thing. But the way that Jacques Tati is funny is a way that is kind of timeless, because they are gags that are rooted in human behavior. And just like to make one thing funny, like just, I think pretty much I can do it, anyone can do it, but to build gags on gags on gags and just basically have that be the structure of your film, because Monong doesn't have a narrative structure. It's not a film about a story where there's a hero who wants something, and it's basically every screenwriting teacher's worst nightmare. It's a film that's totally without structure. It's a rhythm, it's a piece of music, right? And it moves from one gag to the next, and that's the structure. And the way that he directs these gags, and the way that comedy generally is to be directed, is not by cutting in too much, unless like, you're Edgar Wright, but then you're cutting and then you're making the joke reveal the punchline, like, in the opening of Shaun of the Dead, where he cuts from we're like stalking his girlfriend stalking him, and she's like, oh, we come to this pub all the time, and your friend's always there, and then we cut and his friend's there. But Jacques Tati's movies, they're just so beautiful, and they have that level of secondary detail that you can watch, because you watch his films and it's like looking at a painting at a museum for a really long time. If you really let go and you kind of meditate on a painting, you can see just so much detail, and it's so interesting, right? That's kind of like watching the films of Jacques Tati. Jacques Tati is an underrated artist. The level of dedication that he had to his art is insane, because like Playtime, for example, which is a film that kind of happens in this kind of set, which is Paris, but like a really modern Paris, and they had a kind of whole small city built as a set for this film, and that's, to this day, I think it's still there, by the way. And there's a famous story about Tati, is that when he was on his deathbed, because I think he died of his last words is that told his wife to come closer, and then he whispered in her ears, and he was like, I think the blonde is having an affair with the trumpet player. Those are two characters from his film Playtime, and that's just how involved in his work he is. As a film director, on his deathbed, he was still thinking about the characters in the world that he lived in.